At the end of the world, Blue Summer Leaf died in a shattered world, and then she was reborn. Just as she was preparing to hoard supplies, she was selected by the legendary Lord God Space. Is it to participate in the terrifying apocalypse time and time again, gradually becoming stronger on the brink of death, or to refuse and develop oneself in a lewd manner? It seemed like she had no choice. Looking at the gray reject button that couldn't be clicked, Lan Xiaye fell into contemplation. Copy 1. There is a legend circulating in the main God space that when you meet a girl named Lan Xiaye, don't be fooled by her appearance, run immediately. Lan Xiaye. I'm just a delicate woman, everyone. Fart. Copy 2. As we all know, blue summer leaves are very fat. There are countless props, ranking first on the points table. Greedy people organized a siege in an attempt to use the tactics of a sea of people to kill Lan Xiaye and inherit her massive props and points. After countless deaths and injuries, the remaining people looked at the powerless blue summer leaf and launched a crazy attack. Lan Xiaye became angry, and she activated her subconscious. With a gentle smile, everyone was shattered. This is impossible. Before death, everyone's eyes were eager to crack. How could anyone have such a strong subconscious? Infinite flow loyal enthusiasts, cutting meat for self-consumption. Containing certain elements of the Gram series. Special worldview. Everyone has a subconscious, and the power of the subconscious is much stronger than its own. Keywords of the novel. Unlimited Doomsday Escape without pop-ups, Unlimited Doomsday Escape Complete Collection Download, Unlimited Doomsday Escape Latest Chapter Reading. Chapter 1. Main God Space. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Main God Space. Help, help. Don't kill me, I'm your aunt. No, 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 I was wrong. I shouldn't have taken action against them. Please let me go. Xiaoya, at least I watched you grow up too. This is a frozen world, with thick ice layers everywhere underground, and black shadows flickering beneath the ice. On the ice, there hangs a woman, crying and pleading in pain. Who dares to imagine this is the weather of June in City A? Blue Summer Leaf is wearing a thin cotton jacket in this temperature, and her face is delicate and beautiful. In this icy and snowy weather, she appears even more fragile and pale. Lan Xiaye ignored the woman's pleading and lowered her eyes with a gentle smile. Goodbye, she said. She pulled down the rope next to her and let the woman's rope slide down with a snap. Ah 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 ah. You white-eyed wolf. Crazy. As she watched herself getting closer to the ice, the woman's face contorted in fear as she cursed and turned to pleading, I was really wrong, I. Remember that you were also held by me when you were a child. Lan Xiaye's smile remained unchanged as she watched the woman fall on the ice. In an instant, the ice layer was broken from bottom to top, and a black figure quickly emerged, dragging the woman down from the ice. Ah, help. The woman struggled frantically, like a fish pressed on a chopping board, struggling weakly. Gulu gulu. The woman was completely pulled down from the ice, and a large amount of cold water poured into her throat, causing her to involuntarily roll her eyes and struggle weakly in the water. The endless water below the ice layer can vaguely see the shadows of buildings, and a large number of black shadows swim towards the women who fall into the water like a dense tide. No, that's not the shadow. These are all ferocious-looking, decaying underwater zombies. The woman watched in horror as countless eerie and terrifying-looking swimming corpses came tearing and biting, layer after layer, quickly devouring her completely. On the ice, Blue Summer Leaf stood on the steps with cold eyes as she watched the woman fall into the water, without any sadness or joy. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore and coughed a few times. Her face became even paler, with no trace of blood. The sky is a misty and lifeless white, forever bright and blue, and the temperature is still continuously decreasing. And Blue Summer Leaf no longer had the strength to return to her cabin, her blood had been frozen by the extreme cold. Not far away, a walking corpse seemed to have spotted her figure, shouting and running towards her. The world seemed to suddenly remain silent, turning into nothingness, and the sound of tinnitus dripping through the blue summer leaves, from existence to nothingness. Call out. Blue Summer Leaf gasped for breath and suddenly opened her eyes, her body subconsciously arched. The sound of the clock turning on the wall and the sound of people walking and talking in the community downstairs gradually came to her mind. Lan Xiaye stared blankly at the incredibly normal environment outside the window. There was no frozen ice, and naturally no terrifying swimming corpses beneath the ice. Those zombies, extremely cold, seem like a dream. But this is definitely not a dream, reborn. Lan Xiaye thought this way, recalling the apocalypse of her recent death, as if her breath was filled with ice residue, a world that humans could not resist at all. There are no abilities, but countless zombies, and people die every day. But this is not enough. The rainstorm has flooded a large area of land, and many low-level residents have been drowned. People can only continue to seek higher areas to survive. After the tiny humans adapted to this world, extreme cold descended. The world has turned into a world of ice and snow, with a thick layer of ice piled up on the ground. Underneath the ice, there are mutated swimming corpses and huge bodies of water, suddenly breaking through the ice and dragging unguarded people into it. With no intention of giving anyone a living, Lan Xiaye let out a bitter smile, withdrew her thoughts, checked all her savings, prepared to hoard supplies, and spent the terrible end with her parents. Binding successful. With an electronic sound, a transparent electronic screen suddenly appeared in front of Lan Xiaye. The screen was filled with garbled code, followed by an electronic voice saying, "Hello, Lan Xiaye, congratulations on being selected by the main god space and becoming a taskmaster. Main god space, quick peer strategy." "No, we are an infinite escape stream from death," the electronic voice answered honestly. Lan Xiaye was unable to roast, she would agree if she was crazy, "I refuse." The electronic voice readily agreed, "Then please refuse on the screen." The garbled code on the screen becomes a multiple-choice question. Whether to enter the main god space. Yes. No. Blue Summer Leaf Fruit Breakpoint no, and then she realized. No, this key is gray and she cannot click. Why can't I refuse? "You're forcing buying and selling," said Lan Xiaye with a cold voice. The electronic sound was garbled for a while, then returned to normal. "You have traits that cannot be refused, you can only enter the main god space." "What traits?" Electronic audio explanation. "Those who are about to die or have already died will be forced into the space of the Lord God and cannot choose, but you are a reborn person. If you do not choose to enter the space of the Lord God, it will disrupt the balance and cause the world to intensify destruction." Lan Xiaye fell silent, and she compromised, especially when she heard that she had become a formal taskmaster who could draw special abilities, complete tasks to earn points, and exchange items. She changed her face like a Sichuan opera performer, smiling sweetly, as if she was easy to talk about. Main god space. The familiar world before her gradually faded, and her consciousness was like drowning, from blurry to clear. When she regained consciousness, she had already stood on an open road, with a few scattered people standing beside her with blurred eyes. While Blue Summer Leaf was observing the environment, she was also observing them. There are many cars and people walking on the road, and there seems to be a magnetic field controlling them to avoid a line of task takers, invisible and incompatible. Alright, while the safety period is still here, let me introduce the situation. A woman with shoulder-length short hair patted her palm, her face a bit cold. You should have all heard the prompt to enter the main god space, right? I must tell you newcomers, this is not a game. This is not a prank, it is a real, deadly escape world. Next to the woman stood a man, who was 1.75 meters tall and had firm and powerful muscles. His eyes were as cold and cautious as those of a woman, and he should also be a formal taskmaster. They watched the newcomers, considering what useless cannon fodder they could give up. Chapter 1. Let's make a thunderbolt without a male lead. Infinite flow does not require love. Pure infinite stream novels. Each world has a certain element of horror, with different forms, but they are all dangerous worlds. The settings are all original, except for the possibility of encountering memes with abilities. Everything else is personal imagination. A world above level B is a grand apocalyptic worldview, and the monster designs in each world are completely different. Infinite flow is terrifying, so teammates will definitely die, and the female lead will also be injured and on the brink of death. Infinite flow does not require kindness. The female protagonist will undergo a personality change and become increasingly indifferent in the later stages. There is a plot where she saves half of her life and then doesn't care. Here is a plot of character transformation, where the thunderbolt enters by mistake. In the end, the female lead is not the big shot at the beginning. She has golden fingers, but not too strong. I will suppress her golden fingers myself, and her strength will grow, but her mentality will be big shot. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Tasks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Tasks. Their cold gaze swept over the crowd, causing the beginners to shiver. I don't believe it. A middle-aged man in a suit looked a bit pale. He was wearing an extremely expensive watch and had a bit of a beer belly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Are you sent by the Chi family? Tell me, how much does it cost to let me go back?" The man sneered and considered him dead. Apart from the man in the suit, there was also a young girl wearing a white dress, about 18 years old. Although her body trembled slightly, she whispered, "I believe this is true because I was just killed a minute ago." The air suddenly became extremely cold, and other beginners avoided her invisibly. The two old taskers exchanged a glance and saw the mockery in each other's eyes. The man said maliciously, "Do you know who can enter the space of the main god?" He looked maliciously at the trembling beginners until he saw Blue Summer Leaf, and the malice in his eyes dissipated a bit. From the beginning, he noticed this woman. She had an incredibly pure and beautiful face. Her eyebrows and eyes were as beautiful as mist, making people immediately think of the white moonlight that countless people secretly loved in campus time. Contrary to her appearance, she remained calm from beginning to end, observing them all around her. If it weren't for the announcement from the main god space that only he and Quan Hong were officially tasked in this round, he would have thought he was also a formal tasker. It is a material that can be made, and the man has made a conclusion. "What is it?" a young man with the appearance of a college student asked curiously when he saw the man pause. The man gave him a faint glance, losing interest in intimidating beginners. "A person who is already dead or on the verge of death," he said. Seeing the beginners turn pale in an instant, they continued to add, "Only by participating in missions can we continue to live. Come on, newcomers. The benefits of becoming a formal taskmaster are unimaginable. The safety period is coming to an end." The short-haired woman looked around cautiously and quickly said, "This is an E.level world, and the tasks are relatively simple. Novices only need to live for a week. Follow me quickly, let's go to a safe place." After speaking, Quan Hong immediately started moving. As she moved, the surrounding magnetic field also changed, as if an invisible barrier had disappeared. The pedestrians around looked at them with some surprise, and before they could even think about where these people came from, they split apart. An expressionless man appeared behind him, his body covered in light streaks, his eyes emitting inorganic light, his fingers bulging, and he forcefully tore through passers-by, irrigating their blood on himself. "Ah!" The man in the suit exclaimed in horror as he saw this scene and quickly caught up with Quan Hong. "Don't leave me behind." The peaceful world was overturned in an instant, and many such strange people appeared on the road. Quan Hong and another taskmaster Lu Weiqiang quickly dodged these strange people and crawled into a convenience store. Lan Xiaye tensed her body tightly. Due to her previous life experience of being chased by zombies, she calmly observed the surroundings, avoided the attacks of the strange people, jumped up, and followed Quanhong into the convenience store. Quanhong and Lu Weiqiang, who were preparing to help the beginners, looked at Lan Xiaye with strange eyes and then aimed at the outside of the store to welcome the beginners in. They quickly pulled down the roller shutter door of the convenience store. The convenience store clerk looked at them in confusion and quickly ran out of the cashier to stop them. "What are you doing?" Lastly, don't be fooled by the appearance of the female lead. This is purely my personal aesthetic. This article is based on the plot flow and the apocalypse. Female supporting roles are not easy either, don't be fooled by appearances. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Apocalyptic Factors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Apocalyptic Factors. Didn't you see it? There's a strange killer outside, Lu Weiqiang explained and stopped the clerk who was going to open the door. So we need to call the police even more and let them handle it. Hearing the roaring outside and the screams of countless people, Lu Weiqiang ran for help. There was chaos outside, and he sneered, "Are you sure? Monster. There's a monster. Help." The closest cry to the door collapsed as he sought help, and then his voice abruptly ceased, leaving only the chilling sound of eating. In an instant, the convenience store fell silent until the sound of eating disappeared. Only then did the college student lick their lips and suppress their voice, asking, "What is that?" His voice became somewhat hoarse in extreme fear, but he didn't even dare to cough and clear his throat, afraid of attracting those monsters. Quan Hong calmly said, "Those should be the apocalyptic factors of this world." The apocalyptic factor. Blue Summer Leaf murmured softly, "Similar to a zombie." Quan Hong nodded and leaned against the shelf to rest. She didn't pay attention to the salesperson because as long as she talked about the main god space, no one except the task person could hear it. The apocalyptic factor is the thing that causes the destruction of a world, as seen in the biochemical crisis. Zombies are the apocalyptic factors there, and the apocalyptic factors in this world should be the shining things. Lu Weiqiang added, "Those things are quite powerful, their fingers are like sharp blades, and their speed is not very fast. As long as we run faster, we should be able to escape." At this moment, the man in the suit began to vomit wildly. He was the closest person to the person who had been torn apart at the time, with scattered flesh and blood from the deceased on his body. He vomited wildly, recalling the terrifying scene and trembling wildly, "It's impossible to survive." Lu Weiqiang's face changed drastically, and he picked up the girl in a white dress closest to him. "I'm ready to run away," he said. At the moment when Lu Weiqiang changed his face, Lan Xiaye became alert and said, "What kind of thing will be attracted by the smell?" "I don't know." Quan Hong took out his pistol from his waist and aimed it at the door, "But this strong smell will definitely attract some monsters." Sure enough, the rolling shutter door began to be violently smashed, causing Blue Summer Leaf to feel uneasy. Such a big commotion would surely attract more monsters to come over. The clerk looked at the sunken rolling shutter door and ran towards the store in fear. As the rolling shutter door was about to be smashed open, Lan Xiaye decisively followed the salesperson. This type of store usually has a back door, and as expected, the salesperson ran deep, trembling and took out the key, facing the lock hole. The door had already broken, and Quan Hong and Lu Weiqiang were shooting at the monster. "You guys, hurry up and follow me," they said. The college student and the girl in a white dress quickly ran towards Blue Summer Leaf. Blue Summer Leaf looked at the clerk for a while, not sure about the lock hole, grabbed the key, and calmly opened the door. The salesperson immediately hid inside. It turned out to be a warehouse, and made a mistake. "Is there no back door?" Lan Xiaye grabbed the clerk. No, 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 no," the shop assistant said in terror, pulling the door to close. "Common sense misleads me." Lan Xiaye was a bit anxious. It was not realistic to break through at this moment. The warehouse door was very thick, so she should be able to hide for a while. She pulled the door and waved the hand of the salesperson who wanted to close the door. She smiled sweetly at him and said, "If you close the door again, I'll throw you over." The shop assistant trembled and ran into the warehouse in fear, retracting into the goods. The warehouse is very large, pitch black with no light and a hint of air conditioning inside. At this moment, the college student and the girl in a white dress had already run in, and Lan Xiaye shouted to the taskmaster, "Come over quickly." Quan Hong and Lu Weiqiang started to retreat in tacit agreement, shooting several shots at several monsters in a row, pulling up the weak suit man on the ground and throwing him at the monster. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Light Patterns. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Light Patterns. The monsters stopped and surrounded the man in the suit, tearing it apart before starting to eat. Quan Hong and his companions quickly retreated to the warehouse. They caught a glimpse of the monster gradually detaching from its human form, crawling on the ground to eat, and sticking out their long tongues to lick the flesh and blood on the ground. The crimson long tongue and slightly sharper teeth quickly divided into the suit man. Upon seeing the two of them enter the warehouse, Lan Xiaye immediately closed the door and locked it back. Quan Hong sat on the ground panting, "Those things are evolving." A sentence made everyone hold their breath, blushing and pursing their lips. We still have monsters on the surface that can be killed with a gun, but the threat of the gun from those things that just came in is not significant anymore. They can only cause a little damage to them. Not only defense, but also speed is getting faster, they are getting stronger. Lu Weiqiang added. The girl in the white dress cried silently, curling up desperately. How could such an existence be defeated? Not only her, but also the college student's gaze was stunned, and he turned to the two task-takers in great fear. "Please, make sure I live, I can give you a lot of money." "We don't need money," Lu Weiqiang's eyes flickered. "If you go back to the main god space and are willing to give me the points, I will do my best to protect you." "You are the same." He looked at the white dress girl and the blue summer leaf and said gently. "Although I knew points were a good thing at first glance, if I couldn't survive, nothing would be useful." The girl in a white dress and the college student nodded decisively, "I'm willing." Quan Hong glanced at Lu Weiqiang and didn't say anything. "What about you?" Lu Weiqiang looked at Lan Xiaye, who looked at his cold and somewhat greedy eyes. Lan Xiaye became wary inside, but with a sweet smile on his face, "I'll just forget it." Lu Weiqiang narrowed his eyes and stared at Lan Xiaye, "Are you sure?" At this moment, the heavy iron door of the warehouse was frantically hammered, and everyone held their breath for a moment, afraid to speak. Quan Hong and Lu Weiqiang silently aimed their guns at the iron gate. Blue Summer Leaf ran towards the deepest part of the warehouse and hid, where it was pitch black and out of sight. Although invisible, her gaze was fixed on the door. Good luck didn't favor them. The big iron door was smashed open, and the dim light from the convenience store shone in, illuminating the area near the door. The monster's swift movements slowed down and it let out a somewhat uneasy roar. Their voices are very unpleasant, comparable to the mental pollution of fingernails scratching on the blackboard. The taskmaster saw the monster's movement pause and quickly shot, attempting to push back the monster, but instead angered it. The two humanoid monsters rushed in and bit at them. Hiding deep, Blue Summer Leaf observed that as soon as the monster entered the warehouse, its light patterns lit up and it became a prominent presence in the darkness. As they attacked, the light patterns on their bodies gradually dimmed. Blue Summer Leaf remembered this change and continued to observe. The light pattern became darker and darker, and the monsters roared as they reluctantly exited the warehouse. Lan Xiaye was lost in thought, remembering this doubt. She slowly approached forward, standing at a distance not far or close to the tasker. From the moment Lu Weiqiang threatened her to exchange points for protection, she no longer trusted these taskers. How did these monsters exit? Lu Weiqiang's eyes narrowed as he saw them all exit the convenience store, feeling a bit puzzled. The college student flattered and said, maybe it's because you're too powerful and scared away. After being scolded by him, Lu Weiqiang ignored the fleeting feeling in his heart. He looked at Lan Xiaye with a somewhat sinister tone and said, you're running really fast. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Introduction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Introduction. Lan Xiaye looked innocently at Lu Weiqiang, her beautiful eyes filled with guilt. I'm sorry, brother, I'm really too scared. I think you must be so powerful that you can kill these monsters. She waved her fist, her delicate face full of trust in Lu Weiqiang. Her appearance was very playful, without any aggression, and she couldn't help but make Lu Weiqiang let go of a hint of killing intent. Then you can use points. Forget it. Quan Hong interrupted Lu Weiqiang and glanced at Lan Xiaye thoughtfully. Let's discuss countermeasures while it's safer now. Lan Xiaye lowered her eyes, her thick and slender eyelashes trembling gently, looking as if she was trembling with fear and unease. In fact, she was hiding her murderous intent towards Lu Weiqiang. These taskmasters should have other means, temporarily endure and find an opportunity to strike and kill again. Let's introduce ourselves first, Quan Hong said. At the beginning, she didn't introduce herself. On the one hand, the situation was urgent, and probably another reason was that there was no need to introduce herself to the dead. Quan Hong finally smiled and said, my name is Quan Hong, and I am the official taskmaster. This is my third mission. I am the guide. What she didn't say was that the more newbies live, the more points she adds. Of course, if all the newbies die, she won't lose anything. Lu Weiqiang, formal tasker, third mission. As he did not receive Lan Xiaye's points, he felt a bit unhappy and immediately began to ask two other beginners to sign a contract with him. After signing the contract, the girl in a white dress introduced herself and said, my name is Zhang Yunyun, and I am a high school student. My name is Li Zhenhua, a college student who studied electronic programming. Lan Xiaye smiled sweetly and said, my name is Qiusheng, and I am also a college student studying art, which is of no use to everyone. She lowered her head slightly as she spoke. It's okay, we're all together. Li Zhenhua had long thought that Lan Xiaye was very beautiful, that kind of innocent beauty of first love that made people want to take care of and care for. Unfortunately, he had just been on the run, and now that he's safe, he immediately offered his care to the beauty. Zhang Yunyun was somewhat dissatisfied because only Lan Xiaye among the newcomers did not submit any points, which made her feel very unfair. She whispered, if you also submit your points and protect Lu, then there won't be any problem. Lu Weiqiang's eyes lit up and he looked at Zhang Yunyun with admiration. Alright, Quan Hong said impatiently, the key now is how to survive for a week. Didn't you pay attention just now? The power of bullets on them is getting smaller and smaller. Lan Xiaye, who has had a post-apocalyptic experience, suggested, we can bring plenty of food and find a sturdy house to hide in. It should be easier to get through in a week. For now, that's okay. Quan Hong nodded in agreement, but these monsters will undergo mutations and become stronger in the later stages. You need to be prepared for battle at all times while resting. Zhang Yunyun asked hesitantly, do we need to leave here? Due to her genuine experience of death, she was very afraid of danger. The idea of staying here all the time came to mind, isn't it good to stay here all the time? Anyway, those monsters have also left, and this place is full of food. Staying here for a week is completely okay. No way. Lu Weiqiang said, these monsters all hold grudges. When they are well cultivated, they may be surrounded and suppressed. Let's go quickly. Lan Xiaye thought of that scene and felt terrifying. Quan Hong nodded and threw a backpack to each of them, taking the lead in stuffing supplies inside. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Leaving. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Leaving. Lan Xiaye stuffed a few bentos, bread, most of which were fast food and compressed biscuits, into her backpack. Suddenly, she remembered that her drinking water had collapsed and contracted a virus in her past life. She also filled her bag with some mineral water and reminded her, everyone can bring some mineral water. The reason for the prompt is to prevent if there is really a problem with the water source, only if she brings mineral water, it will be taken away. Those task takers were not saints or goddesses. Remembering their ruthlessness in throwing men in suits at monsters and creating escape time for themselves, Lan Xiaye's eyes flickered and she showed a pure smile. I'm worried about what might happen to the water source, isn't that what's written in novels? Quan Hong nodded in agreement and said, everyone prepare some water, just in case. Lan Xiaye didn't pack her back too full. She would rather run a few more times than bring too many things at once. Once the weight exceeds one's ability range, it is highly likely to drag oneself down, causing consequences such as inability to run and significant physical exertion. Are you ready? Quan Hong said in a deep voice. She took out her gun again, held it and hid behind the wall, looking out. The outside was a mess, with shelves falling to the ground like dominoes. The iron brackets had deep indentations and were heavily twisted. This should be the consequence of being trampled on when the monster rushed over. The only benefit of a convenience store being destroyed is that without shelves blocking the view, you can clearly see that the convenience store is in chaos, without worrying about monsters lurking. Quan Hong waved to signal everyone to come out, and the group quietly approached the door. Lan Xiaye was the last one to come out, probably because she didn't pay the protection fee. She thought this way and then realized that the clerk who had been living in the warehouse quickly closed the door again after they left. The shop assistant's action reminded Lan Xiaye of the light patterns on the monster's body, and she always felt that there were some patterns in them. At this moment, Quan Hong had already walked outside the door and was shocked to find that the street had been attacked by monsters. Monsters were everywhere, piled up in pairs, feeding around the broken corpses, and they had already noticed them. Run! Exclaimed Quan Hong in a broken voice, then frantically shot at the monsters and ran outside the convenience store. Zhang Yunyun and Li Zhenhua looked at a bunch of monsters running towards them, their whole blood seemed frozen, and they were too scared to move. It was Lu Weiqiang who gave them a push before panicking and following behind the tasker. Lan Xiaye said to Quan Hong, run in this direction. I just observed that this is a residential area. As early as the safety period, Lan Xiaye remembered all the buildings around her and decisively ran towards the residential area. Quan Hong and others immediately followed behind Lan Xiaye, cleaning up the monsters beside her. Everyone dared not say a word, held their breath, and ran forward blindly. The roar of monsters and the sound of gunshots from Quan Hong and others kept coming from my ears. Lan Xiaye saw the entrance of the community and was overjoyed, accelerating her speed and running towards it. Suddenly, a sharp claw swung straight at her face, followed by a twisted, imperceptible face with a big mouth tearing at her. Quan Hong was shocked in her heart. With such a close distance, she couldn't save her, and she felt sorry for Lan Xiaye in her heart. No one thought that Blue Summer Leaf would survive. Unexpectedly, her body was very soft as she bent down, leaned back, and avoided the monster's attack. Then he quickly flashed aside and rolled towards a building. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Abilities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Abilities. Before everyone could react, Lan Xiaye had already stood up from the unit building, gasping for breath and vigilantly staring at the monster. The monster did not chase after him and rushed towards Zhang Yunyun, who was originally standing behind Lan Xiaye. Zhang Yunyun screamed and ran towards Lu Weiqiang. Unfortunately, in her previous escape, she had run out of stamina and her reaction was not agile enough. The monster's sharp blade cut through the backpack behind her, and everything inside fell to the ground with a thud. The next claw may cut through her body, and Zhang Yunyun shook off his backpack in fear and threw it at the monster's face. Perhaps it was in imminent danger, but her speed increased a lot. She ran behind Lu Weiqiang, grabbed his hand, and cried, saying, "Help me. I'll give you all my points. As you said, save me." Lu Weiqiang's face was a bit unpleasant, as more and more monsters were attracted and their bullets were rapidly depleting. "You run towards Qiusheng, don't hinder me here." He shook off Zhang Yunyan's hand, his voice somewhat cold and suppressed. "No, I'll die." Zhang Yunyan's face was covered in tears as he hugged Lu Weiqiang's arms again. "Damn it." Lu Weiqiang looked at the monster that had already exposed its sharp teeth, licking and grinding its long tongue as it approached step by step, feeling extremely angry in his heart. At this moment, his right hand was held by Zhang Yunyan, making it very inconvenient to move, and he had missed the opportunity to shoot. "Get lost." Lu Weiqiang pushed Zhang Yunyan away and watched as the monster, whose mouth had cracked and was about to wrap around his head, quickly used its powers. A vine pierced through the monster's head, and Lu Weiqiang turned his hands into vines. He whipped the nearby monster and said to Quan Hong, "Let's quickly use our abilities, don't waste time." Quan Hong nodded, put away his gun, and closed his eyes. The next moment, she opened her eyes and sprayed lasers at the monster, quickly clearing out a large area of space. The two of them used their abilities and quickly cleared the monsters around them. Lan Xiaye looked at her with a dazzling array of powerful abilities, which were an important means of survival in the apocalypse. She must complete this beginner task, become a formal taskmaster, and acquire her own abilities. Taking advantage of the clearance of the two, Li Zhenhua rushed to meet with Lan Xiaye. "Pick up the supplies and go upstairs," Lu Weiqiang said coldly to Zhang Yunyan, his face extremely ugly. A few people went up to the 5th floor, looking at the tightly closed door. The newcomers looked at each other in confusion. Lu Weiqiang snorted coldly, and a vine appeared in his palm. The vine skillfully penetrated the lock hole, rotated, and easily opened the door. "Wow!" Li Zhenhua and Zhang Yunyan exclaimed. Even though they had just seen the two taskers each displaying their divine powers, they were still shocked at the moment. Fortunately, this house is very large and unoccupied, otherwise it would probably be driven out in terror. A few people sat on the sofa to rest and calm down the shock they had just experienced. "Qiusheng's luck is very good." Quan Hong praised Lan Xiaye, and her eyes returned to normal, no longer as strong as the laser I just now. Lan Xiaye noticed that the two task-takers had a pale complexion after using their abilities, especially Lu Weiqiang, who could even see his weakness. She gave a shy smile and answered Quan Hong, "I have had good luck since I was young. Just now, Quan Jia and Lu Gu were both powerful, so we were able to escape smoothly." "Humph." Lu Weiqiang looked coldly at Zhang Yunyan, with a hint of killing intent in his anger towards him. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Night. Zhang Yunyan shrank from Lu Weiqiang's gaze, and her face still had wet tears on it, which was very pitiful. "Forget it," Quan Hong comforted. "Everyone is tired, let's find a room to rest." Lu Weiqiang snorted coldly and walked straight towards the master bedroom. Although the house is large, it only has 3 rooms, one of which is still a very simple guest bedroom, and the room is very small. "I'm staying with Lu Weiqiang, Qiusheng, you're staying with Zhang Yunyan, Li Zhenhua, you're staying alone in the guest bedroom, okay?" Quan Hong was also a bit tired. After allocating the room, she went to the master bedroom to rest. After the two task-takers left, Zhang Yunyan began to sob softly. Her backpack was scratched by monsters, and many foods fell off. She could only hold some large pieces of instant noodles and mineral water. She is probably the one with the least amount of resources among everyone, and she is very worried about the food issue that will come next. Zhang Yunyan looked at Lan Xiaye and Li Zhenhua with teary eyes and said, "Can you spare some food for me?" "Sorry, I didn't bring much food either." Lan Xiaye shook her head and decisively refused. So Zhang Yunyan looked at Li Zhenhua again. looking at him pitifully. Li Zhenhua scratched his head and looked at Lan Xiaye in distress, then at Zhang Yunyun. He had a thin skin and felt embarrassed to refuse. Zhang Yunyun left 2 more tears and said, "Please." Although the girl is not as pure and beautiful as the blue summer leaves, her teary eyes are also very moving. She gently bit her lip, revealing her fair skin and collarbone. Li Zhenhua's face turned red. He is just an otaku college student and has never had a girlfriend before. How could he have experienced such a scene? Upon seeing this, Lan Xiaye silently returned to her room. She sorted out supplies in the room, including 3 bottles of mineral water, 2 bentos, 3 pieces of bread, and a few chocolates. There are also 6 bags of instant noodles and some scattered cookies. Lan Xiaye is a bit worried. These foods are definitely not enough to get through 7 days, and she must go out again to get supplies. The sky had already darkened, and there was silence all around. Only the rustling sound of the wind blowing through the leaves could be faintly heard. The darkness outside the window is somewhat eerie, without any moonlight or stars, making people inexplicably uneasy. Blue summer leaves heart-thumped, branches intertwined and hidden in the darkness, seeming like twisted and eerie ghosts. Her heart was beating faster and faster, not sure if it was an illusion, as if the branches of the branches had stretched out, like a window approaching. "I'll go sleep with Li Zhenhua tonight," Zhang Yunyun said as she walked into the room. Her gaze swept over the backpack on the bed and finally landed on Lan Xiaye. Her eyes were a bit complicated, and she finally closed the door and left the room. Lan Xiaye nodded casually, turned around, drew the curtains, and calmed down her inner restlessness. At the moment when the curtains were drawn, the branches outside the window began to move, stretching out one by one and sticking to the windows, emitting a faint halo. "Okay." Her voice was a bit dry, and for some reason, she felt very uneasy in her heart. She was the only one left in the room. Lan Xiaye touched her hungry belly, took out a bento from her bag, hurriedly solved the problem, turned off the lights, and lay in bed. She opened her eyes and looked at the pitch-black room, organizing her thoughts. But during the day, the monsters with deformed limbs and large mouths, as well as the slightly unsettling night just now, filled Lan Xiaye's mind. "My brain was swollen and I had a headache, feeling uneasy and nervous." Before I knew it, Lan Xiaye fell asleep. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Food. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Food. Upon waking up, Lan Xiaye's throat was terrifyingly dry. She rubbed her temples, pursed her saliva, and walked out of the room. It was discovered that Quan Hong and Lu Weiqiang were already sitting in the living room. After a night's rest, their condition returned to its original state. Quan Hong noticed that only Lan Xiaye walked out of the room and frowned. "Where's Zhang Yunyun?" Lan Xiaye talked about last night's situation and saw the contempt in the eyes of the 2 task-takers. She lowered her eyes and asked, "Sister, what happened last night?" Quan Hong pondered for a moment before shaking her head and asking, "No, what's the situation with you?" Lan Xiaye expressed the unease she had seen yesterday and her own heart when she heard Lu Weiqiang's mockery. "You girls are just cowards." Obviously, Quan Hong didn't take it to heart, but she was very optimistic about Lan Xiaye and casually comforted her. "Well, sister, will we appear directly in the main god space as long as we survive for 7 days?" "Yes, when it comes to the main god space." Quan Hong's eyebrows and eyes became more serious, intentionally mentioning blue summer leaf. "You beginners don't have any prompts on the trial field. Usually, we, formal taskers, will repeat the task. Moreover, the difficulty level of the trial field is generally not very high, so don't worry. When it's almost over, you will receive a countdown. As long as you get through that time, you will appear in the main god space and become an official taskmaster." Lan Xiaye listened attentively and then asked about the supernatural powers. Quan Hong smiled and said, "A superpower is the ability to become a formal tasker and draw, but I heard from experienced old taskers that it's not just about luck, but also about whether the superpower is compatible with oneself. I'm not very clear about the specific principle, but in short, by living, you'll gradually know everything. Lan Xiaye nodded and smiled gratefully at Quan Hong. Here we are imparting experience, while Lu Weiqiang impatiently knocked on the door of the guest bedroom. When are you two going to sleep? The guest bedroom was opened, and Li Zhenhua awkwardly walked out. He took an uncomfortable look at Lan Xiaye and explained, last night, Yunyun said she was too scared and asked me to accompany her. Zhang Yunyun walked out of the room and reorganized her appearance, which looked refreshing and clean. Lu Weiqiang rolled his eyes and said, this is the end of the world. If you want to talk about love and romance, go to hell and talk about it. Don't drag us down. He said a simple sentence, but it seemed to outline the decay of world destruction and the uncertainty of human destiny. It seems that countless monsters greedily devour human flesh and blood, society collapses, and floating corpses are everywhere. As soon as Lu Weiqiang said this, it seemed as if even the air had become anxious. Looking at the newbies with a solemn expression, Lu Weiqiang grinned and comforted them, don't be too nervous either. We only need to endure 7 days and we will be safe. The beginner's task is simple, which is a consensus among all task players, so they love to come to the beginner's field. On the one hand, the task is simple, with a high survival rate, and on the other hand, they can also earn some points for beginners. Why not do it? Lu Weiqiang's behavior is actually the behavior of most people in the main divine space. Li Zhenhua and Zhang Yunyun heard Lu Weiqiang's comfort and their expressions became much lighter. They made up their minds to stay in this room for 7 days and never leave the room. I called you out to organize some supplies and see if the food is enough for us to spend 7 days, Lu Weiqiang spread out his backpack, which was filled with food. He and Quan Hong are formal taskers. Although they have not experienced it many times, their physical fitness has been strengthened, so they did not hesitate much and brought a lot of food. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Not enough. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Not enough. The two people were shocked by the abundance of supplies, and it was clear that their food was sufficient to survive the next 6 days. Lan Xiaye thought to herself that they might not leave the house again and go out to search for supplies. She frowned and opened her backpack to start counting. She still has a bento left, which can be used for lunch today. 6 packs of instant noodles, 3 pieces of bread, and some scattered cookies and chocolates. There are still 6 days until the end of the mission, with 3 meals a day. Obviously, these foods are not enough for her, but if she saves some food, she should be able to survive for 6 days. I just don't know if I can spend the next 6 days peacefully in my room, and Lan Xiaye inexplicably feels a little uneasy in her heart. If one stays through 6 days to save food and has very little nutritional intake, it is easy to lose strength and energy. Once there is any accident or danger, the situation will be very bad. The person most worried about the food issue is not Lan Xiaye, but Zhang Yunyun. Due to the monster's attack, she only has a few bottles of mineral water and scattered instant noodles left. Li Zhenhua didn't bring enough food, so he could only barely prevent himself from starving. If he continued to help Zhang Yunyun, neither of them could survive. They naturally turned their gaze to the task person with the most abundant food. May I ask? No way, Lu Weiqiang refused. These two people were of no use to him anymore. If it was Lan Xiaye who was willing to exchange points, he could barely make some food. Zhang Yunyun persisted and said, I can also give you my points for the next round. Please give me some food. Lu Weiqiang didn't even lift his head and regarded her as nothing. I'm really annoyed by Zhang Yunyun. After all, no one can stand being nagged by you all the time, as if they can't understand someone else's face. Lu Weiqiang said maliciously, you can go out and find supplies yourself. Seeing Zhang Yunyun's face turn pale and looking at him weakly, Lu Weiqiang said somewhat condescendingly, this is the end of the world, and I have no obligation to help you. I can even throw you out of this house so that your supplies belong to me, he said with a wicked smile. As soon as this sentence was spoken, it made Zhang Yunyan shut her mouth. She dared not provoke the taskmaster anymore, and then turned her gaze to Lan Xiaye and Li Zhenhua. Lan Xiaye is a bit annoyed with this person. Food is the second most important thing for her. In the end of the world, who would give up precious food for the sake of kindness? Jokes. Her eyes were a bit dark. Kindness was never a good adjective in the apocalypse, it only brought greed and death. No borrowing, Lan Xiaye thought to herself, if Zhang Yunyan continues to entangle, give her a small surprise. Zhang Yunyan was actually very afraid to provoke Lan Xiaye, and he couldn't tell it when he first met. But on the escape route, facing those terrifying monsters, she and Li Zhenhua were both terrified and unable to walk. How could they, who had always lived in a peaceful society, have seen these terrifying scenes? Fear is normal. Only Blue Summer Leaf remained calm from beginning to end, analyzed rationally, and even managed to escape from the monster's henchmen. The two formal task-takers did not see anything in this, but instead believed that Blue Summer Leaf had great potential. However, a person from a peaceful society who had experienced these things for the first time could not be completely calm. This is very thoughtful and extremely frightening. Zhang Yunyan's thinking has long diverged, perhaps Lan Xiaye was a twisted killer before. End of this chapter.